Sarah Chen sat quietly at the far end of the dimly lit bar, nursing her second beer of the evening. The Anchor Tavern was the kind of place where locals came to forget their troubles, and tonight was no different. Country music played softly from the old jukebox in the corner, while conversations hummed around her. She kept her head down, occasionally glancing at her phone, as if waiting for someone, but her eyes were actually scanning the room with practiced precision. For the past 3 months, Sarah had been living what most people would consider an ordinary life. She worked at the local diner during the day, served coffee and burgers to truck drivers and construction workers, and went home to her small apartment above the hardware store. Her neighbors knew her as a quiet woman who kept to herself. Someone who had moved to the small town of Pine Ridge to start fresh after a bad breakup. What they didn't know was that Sarah Chen was a decorated Special Forces operative, currently deep undercover investigating a weapons trafficking ring that had been moving illegal firearms through small towns across 3 states. Pine Ridge had become a critical hub in their operation, and Sarah's mission was to identify the key players and gather evidence that would bring down the entire network. The intelligence suggested that someone in this very bar was connected to the operation. For weeks, she had been coming here, building her cover story, becoming just another face in the crowd. Tonight felt different though. She had noticed increased activity around town, more out-of-state license plates, and hushed conversations that stopped when strangers walked by. At the other end of the bar sat Marcus Rodriguez, a 26-year-old Marine who had recently returned from his second deployment overseas. His broad shoulders filled out his civilian clothes, but the military bearing was unmistakable in the way he sat straight-backed on his bar stool. His dark hair was cut short in regulation style, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much in too few years. Marcus had been struggling with his transition back to civilian life. The nightmares came regularly, sleep was elusive, and the constant noise in his head made it hard to concentrate on much of anything. His buddies from the base had dragged him out tonight, insisting that he needed to get out and have some fun. They meant well, but Marcus felt disconnected from their laughter and easy conversation. He had been drinking steadily for the past hour, trying to quiet the memories that seemed to surface whenever he sat still for too long. The alcohol wasn't helping much, but it was better than sitting alone in his apartment staring at the walls. His friends had moved to the pool table, and their voices seemed to come from very far away. The trouble started when Jake Morrison, a local troublemaker with a reputation for starting fights, walked into the bar with his usual crew of followers. Jake worked construction but spent most of his money on alcohol and had been known to get aggressive when he drank too much. Tonight, he seemed to be in particularly foul mood. Sarah noticed him immediately. In her line of work, she had learned to identify potential threats quickly, and Jake Morrison definitely qualified. She had encountered him twice before during her time in Pine Ridge, both times when he was drunk and looking for trouble. Her training told her to stay alert but maintain her cover. Jake scanned the bar with bloodshot eyes, looking for someone to target for whatever was eating at him. His gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment, taking in her Asian features and lone presence at the bar. In a town that was predominantly white, Sarah stood out, and Jake had made comments about outsiders before. Sarah kept her attention on her phone, pretending to scroll through social media while actually reviewing encrypted messages from her handler. The weapons shipment they had been tracking was supposed to move through Pine Ridge sometime this week, and she needed to be ready to follow any leads that developed. Jake swaggered over to where Sarah sat, his heavy boots loud on the wooden floor. His 3 companions followed. Emboldened by alcohol and group mentality, Sarah could smell the beer on his breath before he even spoke. Well, what do we have here?" Jake said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quieter bar. "Don't think I've seen you around here before, sweetheart." Sarah looked up with what appeared to be mild annoyance, playing the role of someone who just wanted to be left alone. "I've been coming here for months," she said simply, taking another sip of her beer. "Months, huh?" Jake leaned against the bar, invading her personal space. "Funny. I don't remember seeing any Oriental girls in here before tonight." The racial slur hung in the air like a challenge. Several other patrons glanced over, some looking uncomfortable, others waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. Breaking cover over an ignorant drunk wasn't worth compromising her mission. I think you've had enough to drink, Sarah said quietly, not looking at him directly. Maybe you should head home. Jake's face darkened at what he perceived as disrespect. In his alcohol-clouded mind, this outsider was telling him what to do in his own town. His friends snickered, encouraging his aggressive behavior. Did you just tell me what to do? Jake stepped closer, his voice rising. You think you can come into our town and tell us how to act? Sarah remained calm, her training taking over. She assessed the situation quickly. Jake was drunk, angry, and looking for a fight. His 3 friends were positioning themselves around her, cutting off easy escape routes. The rest of the bar was watching but seemed unlikely to intervene. The bartender, an older man named Eddie, looked nervous but hadn't moved to call for help. Marcus had been only half listening to the conversation at the other end of the bar, but something about the tone made him look up from his drink. He saw the confrontation developing and felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. He had seen bullying before, both overseas and back home, and something about the situation reminded him of incidents he would rather forget. Look, I'm just trying to have a quiet drink, Sarah said, her voice still level despite the growing tension. I'm not looking for any trouble. Jake laughed, a harsh sound that carried no humor. Trouble? You think this is trouble? This is nothing compared to what happens to people who don't show proper respect around here. He reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. Maybe you need to learn some manners. The moment Jake's hand made contact with her arm, Sarah's training kicked into high gear. She could have disabled him in seconds. Could have put all 4 men on the ground before they knew what hit them, but doing so would blow her cover completely and potentially compromise months of careful investigation. Instead, she tried to de-escalate. Take your hand off me, she said firmly. Loud enough for the entire bar to hear. Or what? Jake tightened his grip, his face inches from hers. What are you going to do about it? That's when Marcus made his decision. The alcohol in his system, combined with months of pent-up frustration and the trigger of seeing someone being bullied, overrode his better judgment. He stood up from his bar stool with such force that it toppled over backward. Hey! Marcus shouted, his Marine training evident in his commanding voice. Let her go! Jake turned to see who was challenging him, still holding Sarah's arm. When he saw Marcus, a different kind of anger flashed in his eyes. Jake had always resented military personnel, seeing them as outsiders who thought they were better than everyone else. This ain't your business, soldier boy, Jake snarled. Why don't you go back to your war games and let the real men handle this? Marcus took several steps toward the group, his hands clenched into fists. The other bar patrons began to back away, sensing that violence was about to erupt. Sarah watched Marcus approach, noting his military bearing and the dangerous look in his eyes. She could see that he was intoxicated and operating on emotion rather than logic. I said let her go, Marcus repeated, stopping just a few feet away from Jake's group. Jake finally released Sarah's arm but turned his full attention to Marcus. You want to make something of this, Marine? How did you know I was a Marine? Marcus asked, his voice low and threatening. It's written all over you, Jake sneered. The haircut, the way you walk, the way you think you're some kind of hero. Well, this isn't Afghanistan, and you're not in charge here. The mention of Afghanistan hit Marcus like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind. The explosion that had killed 3 of his squad mates, the sounds of gunfire, the smell of burning vehicles. His breathing became shallow, and his vision seemed to narrow. Sarah watched this exchange with growing concern. She could see that Marcus was being triggered by something, possibly PTSD-related. His posture had changed, becoming more aggressive and less controlled. She recognized the signs from her own experience with combat stress. Marcus, don't, she said, though she realized he probably didn't even know her name. He's not worth it. But Marcus was beyond hearing reason. The combination of alcohol, traumatic memories, and righteous anger had pushed him past his breaking point. When Jake made a dismissive gesture and turned away, Marcus snapped. He grabbed Jake by the shoulder and spun him around, his fist already moving in a devastating right cross that connected solidly with Jake's jaw. The sound of the impact was sharp and clear in the suddenly silent bar. Jake's head snapped back and he staggered, blood beginning to flow from his split lip, but Jake wasn't finished. Despite the solid hit, he recovered quickly and launched himself at Marcus, driving his shoulder into the Marine's midsection and taking both of them to the floor. The two men crashed into chairs and tables, sending drinks flying and patrons scrambling for safety. Marcus's friends from the pool table started moving toward the fight, as did Jake's crew. Sarah could see that the situation was about to escalate into a full-scale brawl that would certainly bring police attention she couldn't afford. In the chaos of the fight, Sarah found herself in an impossible position. Every instinct told her to intervene, to use her training to end the violence quickly and efficiently. But doing so would reveal capabilities that a small-town diner waitress shouldn't possess. Marcus and Jake rolled across the floor, throwing punches and trying to gain advantage. Marcus's military training was evident in his technique. But Jake was fighting dirty, using knees and elbows, and even trying to bite. The other men were about to join in when Sarah made her choice. She stepped forward and shouted, "That's enough," in a voice that carried such authority that everyone in the bar froze for a moment. In that brief pause, Marcus managed to get on top of Jake and pin him down. Blood was flowing from cuts on both men's faces, and their clothes were torn and dirty. Marcus drew back his fist for another punch, his eyes wild with adrenaline and rage. "Marcus, stop," Sarah called out, moving closer. "You've made your point." Something in her voice penetrated the red haze in Marcus's mind. He looked up at her, confusion evident on his face. For a moment, neither man moved, but Jake wasn't finished. While Marcus was distracted, he bucked upward and managed to throw the Marine off balance. In one fluid motion, Jake rolled to his feet and grabbed a beer bottle from the nearest table, smashing it against the edge to create a jagged weapon. "Now you're going to pay," Jake snarled, advancing on Marcus with the broken bottle raised. Sarah saw the broken glass and knew that the situation had gone beyond simple bar fight into potentially deadly territory. Marcus was still on the ground, vulnerable and possibly disoriented from the fall. Jake's intent was clearly to cause serious harm. Without thinking, Sarah moved. Her body reacted with the speed and precision of years of elite training. She stepped between Jake and Marcus, caught Jake's wrist as he swung the bottle downward, and used his own momentum to redirect the attack away from both men. The movement was so fast and so smoothly executed that most of the bar's patrons missed it entirely. They saw Jake swing the bottle, saw Sarah somehow get involved, and then saw Jake stumbling backward, the broken bottle flying across the room to shatter harmlessly against the far wall. Jake looked stunned, staring at his empty hand as if he couldn't understand how the bottle had gotten away from him. Sarah stood between him and Marcus, her posture alert but not obviously threatening to casual observers. "The police are on their way," Eddie the bartender announced, holding up his phone. "I called them when the fighting started." The mention of police had an immediate sobering effect on everyone involved. Jake's friends quickly moved to his side, helping him toward the back exit. Jake himself seemed confused about what had just happened, but he allowed himself to be led away. Marcus struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his nose with the back of his hand. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice still rough with adrenaline. Sarah's mind raced, looking for an explanation that wouldn't compromise her cover. "I took some self-defense classes in college," she said, helping to steady Marcus as he swayed slightly. "Lucky for both of us." Marcus nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. His military experience had taught him to recognize combat-effective movement, and what he had just witnessed was far beyond basic self-defense training. The sound of sirens could be heard approaching in the distance. Sarah knew that she needed to distance herself from this situation as quickly as possible. Police reports and official attention were the last things an undercover operative needed. "Are you okay?" she asked Marcus, noting that while he had some cuts and bruises, he didn't appear to be seriously injured. "I'll be fine," he said, though he was still studying her face carefully. "Thank you for what you did. That could have gotten really ugly." You were trying to help me, Sarah replied. I couldn't let you get hurt because of it. Marcus's friends had finally made their way through the scattered chairs and tables to reach him. They looked shaken by the violence, but relieved to see that Marcus was on his feet and talking coherently. Dude, we need to get out of here before the cops show up, one of them said urgently. You know how this is going to look. Marcus nodded reluctantly. A Marine with PTSD involved in a bar fight would not reflect well on his service record or his chances of maintaining his current assignment. He looked at Sarah one more time. I never got your name, he said. Sarah, she replied simply. Sarah Chen. Marcus Rodriguez, he said, extending his hand. When she shook it, he noticed that her grip was firm, and her hands showed calluses that seemed inconsistent with waitressing work. Maybe I'll see you around. Sarah watched as Marcus and his friends quickly exited through the front door, just as the police sirens grew much louder. She looked around the bar, noting the overturned furniture, broken glass, and nervous patrons. Eddie was trying to clean up the worst of the damage before the officers arrived. She finished her beer in one long swallow, left money on the bar to cover her tab plus a generous tip, and headed for the side exit that led to the alley behind the building. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she could see the red and blue lights reflecting off the buildings as the police cars pulled up to the front of the bar. Sarah walked quickly but calmly through the alley, her mind already working through the implications of what had just happened. She had maintained her cover, but barely. Her intervention with the broken bottle had been necessary to prevent serious injury, but it had also revealed capabilities that might make people ask questions she couldn't answer truthfully. More concerning was the fact that Marcus had clearly noticed something unusual about her actions. Military personnel were trained observers, and he had been watching her carefully even before the fight began. She would need to be extra careful around him in the future. As she reached her car parked 2 blocks away from the bar, Sarah's encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. She checked the display and saw that it was from her handler, Agent Williams. The message was brief but significant. Package arriving tomorrow night. Maintain surveillance and report all contact attempts. Sarah leaned against her car and took a deep breath. The weapons shipment was finally moving, which meant her months of careful preparation were about to pay off. But tonight's incident had complicated things in ways she hadn't anticipated. She thought about Marcus Rodriguez, the troubled Marine who had tried to defend her honor without knowing anything about her. There was something about him that suggested he might be useful to her mission, but getting involved with local personnel was always risky. As she drove home through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, Sarah began planning her next moves. The weapons trafficking ring was finally making their move, and she needed to be ready to document everything while maintaining her cover as just another small-town waitress trying to start over. What she didn't know was that her life was about to become far more complicated than even her extensive training had prepared her for. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for another day at the Pine Ridge Diner. Her small apartment above the hardware store felt more confining than usual as she reviewed the previous night's events. The encrypted message about the weapon shipment weighed heavily on her mind, but she couldn't shake the image of Marcus Rodriguez and the way he had looked at her after she disarmed Jake Morrison. Sarah, dressed in her usual waitress uniform, checked her concealed communication device and made her way downstairs to begin what she hoped would be a routine day of maintaining her cover. What she didn't expect was to find Marcus sitting in a booth near the window, nursing a cup of coffee and sporting a colorful bruise on his left cheek. He looked up when the bell above the door chimed her entrance, and their eyes met across the nearly empty diner. It was barely 7 in the morning, and the usual breakfast crowd hadn't arrived yet. Only 2 other customers sat at the counter, local men heading to work at the sawmill. "Morning," Marcus said simply as Sarah approached with the coffee pot. "You're up early," she replied, filling his cup. In the daylight, she could see that his injuries from the fight were more extensive than she had initially thought. Along with the bruise on his cheek, there was a small cut above his left eye, and his knuckles showed the telltale scrapes of someone who had been in a serious altercation. "Couldn't sleep," Marcus admitted, wrapping his hands around the warm coffee cup. "Thought I might find you here." Sarah felt a slight chill that had nothing to do with the morning weather. "Is there something specific you needed?" Marcus studied her face for a long moment before speaking. "I wanted to thank you properly for last night. and to apologize for putting you in that situation in the first place. I wanted to the first place. You were trying to help me, Sarah said, refilling his cup even though he had barely touched it. I appreciated the gesture, even if it got a little out of hand. A little out of hand, Marcus repeated with a rueful smile. That's one way to put it. Sarah waited for him to continue, using the silence as an opportunity to observe him more carefully. His civilian clothes were clean and pressed, suggesting military habits that died hard. His posture was alert despite his claim of sleeplessness, and his eyes kept scanning the room in a way that suggested training in situational awareness. Can I ask you something? Marcus finally said. Sarah tensed internally while maintaining her casual demeanor. Sure. Where exactly did you learn those self-defense moves? Because what you did last night was way beyond anything they teach in college classes. This was the question Sarah had been dreading. She had hoped that in the confusion and chaos of the bar fight, her intervention would have been less noticeable. Clearly, she had underestimated Marcus's observational skills. I took classes for several years, she said carefully. After I moved here, I wanted to make sure I could take care of myself in a small town where everyone doesn't necessarily welcome outsiders. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Marcus seemed to sense there was more to the story. But before he could press further, the bell above the door chimed again. 3 men entered the diner, and Sarah immediately recognized them as the type of individuals she had been watching for during her undercover assignment. They were well-dressed in expensive casual clothing, drove vehicles with out-of-state license plates, and carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to getting their way through intimidation or money. The leader of the group was a man in his 40s with graying hair and cold eyes that swept the diner with professional interest. His 2 companions were younger, both built like bodyguards or muscle for hire. Sarah had seen similar groups passing through Pine Ridge over the past several weeks, always heading toward the industrial district on the outskirts of town. Good morning, gentlemen, Sarah said as they took seats at a booth on the opposite side of the diner from Marcus. Coffee to start? Just coffee for now, the leader said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Sarah couldn't immediately place. We're waiting for someone. As Sarah poured their coffee, she listened carefully to their quiet conversation while appearing to focus on her work. They spoke in code, but her training in intelligence gathering allowed her to pick up references that suggested they were indeed connected to the weapons trafficking operation she had been investigating. Marcus watched this interaction with growing curiosity. Something about the 3 men set off alarm bells in his mind, instincts developed through multiple deployments in hostile territory. The way they positioned themselves in the booth to maintain visual contact with all entrances. The way their eyes constantly moved to assess potential threats. The careful way they spoke in voices too low for casual eavesdropping. When Sarah returned to his table, Marcus leaned forward slightly. Friends of yours? He asked quietly. Never seen them before, Sarah replied truthfully, though she kept her voice neutral. They're not from around here, Marcus observed. Military bearing, but not current military. Private security, maybe, or something less legal. Sarah felt a spark of surprise at his accurate assessment. Marcus Rodriguez was clearly more observant and analytically capable than she had initially realized. This could be either very helpful or very dangerous to her mission. You seem to know a lot about reading people, she said. 2 deployments overseas will teach you to size up a room pretty quickly, Marcus replied. Those guys are professionals of some kind, and they're not here for the tourist attractions. Before Sarah could respond, the diner's bell chimed once more, and a 4th man entered. This one Sarah recognized immediately from the intelligence photos in her secure files. Tommy Castellano was a mid-level weapons broker who served as a connection between the suppliers and the street-level distributors. His presence in Pine Ridge meant that the operation was moving into its active phase. Castellano approached the booth where the 3 men were sitting, and Sarah made sure to be within earshot as she refilled coffee cups at nearby tables. Everything on schedule? Castellano asked as he slid into the booth. The delivery arrives tonight, the leader responded. Our buyers will be ready. Good. The sooner we move this merchandise, the sooner we can get out of this nowhere town. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the confirmation she had been waiting for. Tonight's operation would be her opportunity to gather the evidence needed to bring down the entire trafficking network. She needed to alert her handler immediately. But first, she had to finish her shift without arousing suspicion. Marcus had been watching Sarah's face during this exchange, and he noticed subtle changes in her expression that suggested she was more than casually interested in the conversation at the other table. Her body language had shifted slightly, becoming more alert and focused. The four men finished their coffee quickly and left the diner together, heading toward two black SUVs parked outside. Through the window, Sarah watched them drive toward the industrial district, where several abandoned warehouses provided perfect locations for illegal activities. "Interesting group," Marcus commented after they had gone. Sarah turned back to him, realizing that she needed to be more careful about concealing her reactions. "Just out-of-town business travelers, I think. Business travelers who meet in diners at 7 in the morning and speak in code about deliveries and merchandise," Marcus said. "What kind of business do you think they're in?" "ID is not." The question hung in the air between them. Sarah could see that Marcus suspected something was not right about the situation, and his military background had given him enough experience to recognize when something illegal might be happening. "I wouldn't know," Sarah said, but she could see that Marcus wasn't convinced. The morning breakfast crowd began to arrive, providing Sarah with an excuse to focus on her work and avoid further questions from Marcus, but she remained acutely aware of his presence in the booth, and the way he continued to watch her throughout the morning. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus finally left the diner, but not before approaching the counter where Sarah was working the cash register. "Sarah," he said quietly, "if you ever need any help with anything, or if you find yourself in another situation like last night, here's my number." He handed her a business card with his contact information written on the back. "I mean it. I know we don't know each other very well, but something tells me you might find yourself dealing with more trouble than a small-town waitress should have to handle." Sarah took the card, noting that it listed his rank and unit assignment. "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate the offer." After he left, Sarah spent the remainder of her shift planning her next moves. She needed to conduct surveillance on the warehouse district to identify the exact location where the weapons delivery would take place. She also needed to prepare her equipment and coordinate with her backup team without blowing her cover. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus Rodriguez more than she should have. His offer of help was both touching and potentially useful, but involving civilians in undercover operations was against every protocol she had been taught. Still, having a trained Marine as backup might prove valuable if the situation turned dangerous. At 4 o'clock, Sarah's replacement arrived for the evening shift, allowing her to leave the diner and begin preparations for what would likely be the most critical night of her assignment. She drove to her apartment, changed into dark clothing suitable for surveillance work, and gathered her specialized equipment from its hiding place behind a false wall in her bedroom closet. The equipment included night vision goggles, a high-resolution camera with telephoto lens, encrypted communication devices, and a compact pistol with spare ammunition. She also strapped on a tactical vest under her jacket and clipped a knife to her belt. If things went wrong tonight, she wanted to be prepared for any eventuality. As darkness fell over Pine Ridge, Sarah made her way to the industrial district on foot, avoiding the main roads and using back alleys and wooded areas to remain unseen. The warehouses were located about 2 miles from the center of town, in an area that had been largely abandoned since the local manufacturing plant had closed 3 years earlier. Sarah positioned herself in an elevated location that provided clear sight lines to 3 of the largest warehouses. Using her night vision equipment, she began systematic surveillance of the area, looking for signs of activity that would indicate which building was being used for the illegal weapons transfer. Around 9 o'clock, vehicles began arriving at the southernmost warehouse. Sarah counted 2 trucks, 3 SUVs, and several cars, representing what appeared to be both the supply side and the buyer side of the transaction. Using her telephoto camera, she began documenting faces, license plate numbers, and any other identifying information that could be used as evidence. The weapons transfer began around 10 o'clock. Sarah watched through her camera as wooden crates were unloaded from the trucks and opened for inspection by the buyers. Even from her distant position, she could see automatic rifles, ammunition boxes, and what appeared to be military-grade explosives. This was exactly the evidence her superiors needed to shut down the trafficking operation and arrest everyone involved. Sarah activated her encrypted communication device to contact her backup team and coordinate the timing of the law enforcement response. That's when everything went wrong. A hand grabbed her shoulder from behind, spinning her around before she could react. In the darkness, she found herself facing Jake Morrison and two of his friends from the previous night's bar fight. Well, look what we have here, Jake said, his voice thick with alcohol and revenge. Little Miss Kung Fu thinks she can spy on people. Sarah's mind raced as she assessed the situation. Jake and his companions had somehow discovered her surveillance position, which meant they were either working with the trafficking operation or had been conducting their own surveillance of the area. Either way, her cover was blown, and her mission was in immediate jeopardy. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said, trying to maintain her civilian identity despite being caught with obviously professional surveillance equipment. Save it, Jake snarled. We've been watching you for weeks. Little waitress who asks too many questions, shows up at too many places, and happens to be real good at fighting. You're some kind of cop, aren't you? Before Sarah could respond, Jake's friend produced a handgun and pointed it directly at her chest. The situation had escalated from blown cover to life-threatening in a matter of seconds. The people in that warehouse pay good money to make sure their business doesn't get interrupted, Jake continued. And we make sure that outsiders who stick their noses where they don't belong disappear permanently. Sarah realized that Jake Morrison wasn't just a local troublemaker. He was part of the security network that protected the weapons trafficking operation, and her months of careful investigation had just turned into a deadly confrontation. In the distance, she could hear vehicles starting up at the warehouse, suggesting that her surveillance had been detected and the criminals were preparing to evacuate. Her backup team was still minutes away, and she was facing 3 armed men who had clear orders to eliminate her. That's when she heard a familiar voice call out from the darkness behind Jake's group. Hey Jake, remember me? Marcus Rodriguez stepped into the clearing, his hands empty but his posture suggesting he was ready for violence. I thought we settled our differences last night, but if you want round 2, I'm happy to oblige. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with concern. Marcus had somehow followed her to this location, which meant he had been watching her more closely than she had realized. His arrival might provide the distraction she needed to escape, but it also meant that a civilian was about to be caught in the crossfire of a federal law enforcement operation. Jake turned toward Marcus, momentarily confused by this unexpected development. What are you doing here, soldier boy? Following a hunch, Marcus replied, his eyes taking in the surveillance equipment and the drawn weapon with professional assessment. Looks like my instincts were right about this place. Sarah used the moment of distraction to evaluate her options. With Marcus providing a diversion, she might be able to neutralize the immediate threat and escape to coordinate with her backup team, but doing so would require revealing her true capabilities, ending any possibility of maintaining her undercover identity. The sound of gunfire from the direction of the warehouse made the decision for her. The weapons traffickers had detected law enforcement activity and were engaging in armed resistance rather than attempting to flee. The entire operation was falling apart, and maintaining her cover was no longer the priority. Sarah moved with deadly precision, striking the gunman's wrist with a disarming blow that sent his weapon flying into the darkness. Before Jake could react, she had pivoted and delivered a devastating kick to his solar plexus that dropped him to his knees, gasping for air. The third man tried to tackle her from behind, but Sarah spun and caught him with an elbow strike to the temple that rendered him unconscious before he hit the ground. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds, leaving Marcus staring at the 3 unconscious men scattered around the clearing. Okay, Marcus said slowly. That was definitely not college self-defense classes. Sarah looked at him, realizing that there was no point in maintaining her cover story any longer. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a federal agent investigating weapons trafficking. You need to leave this area immediately before the shooting gets worse. Marcus absorbed this information with the composure of someone accustomed to rapidly changing tactical situations. Federal agent. That explains a few things. Marcus, I'm serious, Sarah continued, gathering her equipment as more gunfire erupted from the warehouse complex. "This is about to become a war zone. And you're a civilian." "Former Marine," Marcus corrected. "And it looks like you could use some backup." Before Sarah could argue, her encrypted radio crackled with an urgent message from her handler. "Agent Chen. We've lost contact with the assault team. The suspects are heavily armed and have taken defensive positions." "What's your status?" Sarah keyed the radio. "I'm alive but compromised. The suspects know they're under surveillance and are prepared to fight. Can you provide overwatch and intelligence support until additional units arrive?" Sarah looked at Marcus, who was checking the unconscious men for additional weapons while maintaining watch on the approaches to their position. Despite the chaos and danger, he appeared calm and focused. "Affirmative," Sarah replied into the radio. "I have the situation under control." As the sounds of battle intensified in the distance, Sarah found herself working alongside the Marine she had met less than 24 hours earlier, preparing for what would likely be the most dangerous night of both their lives. The abandoned industrial complex had transformed into a battlefield. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as Sarah's federal backup team engaged the heavily armed weapons traffickers who had taken defensive positions throughout the warehouse facility. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed off the concrete buildings, creating a cacophony that could be heard for miles in the quiet rural landscape. Sarah and Marcus had taken cover behind a concrete loading dock about 200 yards from the main warehouse, where the weapons transfer had been taking place. From their elevated position, they could observe the tactical situation while remaining relatively protected from the crossfire. "How many federal agents are down there?" Marcus asked, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "Assault team of 8+ support personnel," Sarah replied, scanning the battlefield through her night vision scope. But they walked into a trap. These weren't just weapons traffickers. They were expecting law enforcement. Marcus studied the tactical layout with the professional eye of someone who had planned and executed military operations in hostile territory. "The suspects have good defensive positions and overlapping fields of fire. Your people are pinned down in the parking area with minimal cover." Sarah's radio crackled with urgent communications from her handler. "Agent Chen. We need intelligence on suspect positions and capabilities. The assault team leader is down and we're taking heavy casualties." Sarah keyed her radio. "This is Chen. I count approximately 15 hostiles with military-grade weapons and body armor. They have defensive positions in the main warehouse and 2 smaller buildings. Suspects appear to have prior knowledge of the raid." "Copy that. Emergency response team is en route, but won't arrive for 20 minutes. Can you provide support fire from your position?" Sarah looked at Marcus, who had been listening to the radio conversation. "I can't engage directly without risking civilian casualties and compromising the federal operation. My priority is intelligence gathering and staying alive." "What about your civilian friend?" the handler asked. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus took the radio. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. I'm volunteering to provide tactical support to federal law enforcement under emergency circumstances." There was a brief pause before the handler responded. "Sergeant Rodriguez, are you currently active duty?" "Negative. Currently on administrative leave but fully qualified and combat experienced." "Agent Chen, what's your assessment?" Sarah looked at Marcus, recognizing the professional competence in his demeanor and the way he had instantly grasped the tactical situation. His offer of help could be invaluable, but it would also put him in significant danger. "Sergeant Rodriguez has the training and experience to be useful," Sarah said finally. "But this is not his mission and not his responsibility." Marcus met her gaze. "Maybe not my mission. But those are American law enforcement officers being shot at by criminals with illegal weapons. That makes it my responsibility." A massive explosion from the direction of the warehouse complex emphasized his point. One of the smaller buildings had erupted in flames, and Sarah could see federal agents retreating from their advanced positions under heavy fire. "Agent Chen, we need immediate support, or we're going to lose people," came the urgent voice over the radio. Sarah made her decision. "Sergeant Rodriguez and I are moving to provide overwatch and tactical support. We'll coordinate with your field commander. Copy that. Field commander is Agent Williams, taking cover behind the white van in the southeast parking area. Sarah and Marcus quickly gathered their equipment and began moving toward the action. Sarah carried her sniper rifle and communication gear, while Marcus had acquired an assault rifle from one of Jake Morrison's unconscious associates, along with extra ammunition. As they moved through the darkness toward the federal agent's position, Marcus spoke quietly. "So, how long have you been undercover in Pine Ridge?" 3 months, Sarah replied, keeping her voice low as they navigated around abandoned machinery and debris. This weapons trafficking ring has been moving illegal firearms through small towns across 3 states. Pine Ridge was identified as a major hub in their distribution network. And Jake Morrison? Local muscle hired to provide security and eliminate threats. I obviously qualified as a threat after tonight. They reached the federal agent's position after a careful approach that kept them hidden from the suspect's defensive positions. Agent Williams, Sarah's handler, was a veteran law enforcement officer in his 50s who had been coordinating federal investigations for over 20 years. "Chen, glad you're alive," Williams said as they slid into cover behind the armored van. "We walked into a coordinated ambush. These suspects had advance warning and prepared accordingly." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. How could they have known about tonight's operation? "Someone leaked information," Williams replied grimly. "We're dealing with a security breach at the federal level, which means this trafficking network has connections we didn't know about." Marcus had been studying the tactical situation while listening to their conversation. "Agent Williams, what are your objectives for this operation?" "Capture or neutralize the suspects, secure the weapons cache, and gather evidence for prosecution," Williams answered. "But right now we're just trying to avoid getting killed." Marcus pointed toward the warehouse complex. "The suspects have the advantage of prepared positions, but they're contained in a limited area. If we can establish overwatch positions and coordinate simultaneous pressure from multiple angles, we can break their defensive line." Williams looked at Sarah. "Your Marine friend seems to know what he's talking about." 2 deployments in Afghanistan," Marcus said. "I've been in this type of situation before." Another burst of automatic weapons fire from the warehouse emphasized the urgency of their situation. Williams made his decision. "Okay, Sergeant Rodriguez, you're now a federal law enforcement volunteer. Agent Chen, you and Rodriguez establish overwatch on the north side of the complex. Provide intelligence and covering fire as needed. We'll coordinate a simultaneous assault from 3 directions in 15 minutes. Sarah and Marcus moved out immediately, using their night vision equipment to navigate through the industrial complex while avoiding the main areas of conflict. Their objective was a water tower on the north side of the facility that would provide an elevated shooting position with clear sightlines to the warehouse. The climb up the water tower was treacherous in the darkness, but both Sarah and Marcus were in excellent physical condition and accomplished it without incident. From their elevated position, they could see the entire battlefield laid out below them. "I count 14 hostiles," Marcus said, scanning through his rifle scope. "They're well-positioned but not professional military, probably mercenaries or private security contractors." Sarah was documenting the scene with her camera while maintaining radio contact with the assault team. "Agent Williams, we have visual confirmation of suspect positions. They have heavy weapons but limited ammunition supplies based on their firing patterns." "Copy that. Beginning coordinated assault in 60 seconds. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that accompanied combat operations. Despite her extensive training and experience, every engagement carried the risk of injury or death. And tonight's operation had already proven to be more dangerous than anticipated. "Marcus," she said quietly, "you don't have to do this. You're a civilian now, and this isn't your fight." Marcus looked at her through his rifle scope. "You know, 3 months ago, I would have agreed with you. But watching what happened in that bar last night, seeing you risk yourself to help people, it reminded me why I became a Marine in the first place." The coordinated federal assault began with flashbang grenades and coordinated movement from 3 directions. Sarah and Marcus provided precision covering fire, eliminating suspects who tried to outflank the advancing federal agents while maintaining communication with the ground teams. The battle was intense, but relatively brief. The weapons traffickers, despite their heavy armament, were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by the coordinated federal response. Within 30 minutes, the shooting had stopped, and the surviving suspects were in custody. Sarah and Marcus climbed down from the water tower and made their way to the warehouse, where Agent Williams was coordinating the evidence collection. The weapons cache they discovered was larger than anyone had anticipated. Hundreds of automatic rifles, thousands of rounds of ammunition, explosives, and even military-grade rocket launchers. This is enough firepower to equip a small army, Williams observed as they surveyed the captured weapons. We're not just dealing with street-level gun trafficking. This is something much bigger. Sarah was examining documentation found in the warehouse office when she discovered evidence that confirmed her worst fears. The weapons trafficking network had been selling to domestic terrorist groups, foreign agents, and organized crime syndicates across the entire country. Agent Williams. Look at this. She called him over to a computer terminal. Financial records, communication logs, distribution networks. This Pine Ridge operation was just one small part of a national conspiracy. Marcus was helping to process suspects when he recognized one of the captured men. Agent Williams. This guy was in the diner yesterday morning talking to those out-of-town visitors. Williams examined the suspect's identification. Vincent Castellano, known associate of organized crime families in 3 states. If he's involved, this trafficking network has connections to major criminal organizations. The investigation of the warehouse complex continued through the night and into the early morning hours. Federal crime scene specialists documented everything while additional agents arrived to assist with processing the evidence and interrogating the captured suspects. As dawn broke over Pine Ridge, Sarah found herself sitting on the loading dock where she and Marcus had first taken cover. Exhaustion finally beginning to set in after the long night of violence and investigation. Marcus approached with 2 cups of coffee provided by the federal command post that had been established in the warehouse parking lot. Quite a night, he said, sitting down beside her. Definitely not what I expected when I moved to Pine Ridge 3 months ago, Sarah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The abandoned industrial complex looked peaceful in the morning light, giving no indication of the violent battle that had taken place just hours earlier. So what happens now? Marcus asked eventually. Sarah considered the question carefully. The federal investigation will continue. This trafficking network is much larger than we initially suspected, and there will be months of follow-up work to identify and arrest all the participants. And you? I'll probably be reassigned to another undercover operation somewhere else in the country. This type of work requires moving frequently to maintain operational security. Marcus nodded, though something in his expression suggested disappointment. Will you stay in touch? Sarah looked at him, considering how much her life had changed in the past 24 hours. Meeting Marcus had reminded her of aspects of herself that she had almost forgotten during years of undercover work. The importance of genuine human connections, and the value of people who were willing to risk themselves to help others. Marcus, I want you to know that what you did tonight was incredibly brave and professional. You saved lives and helped shut down a dangerous criminal operation. But my work requires me to maintain a level of separation from personal relationships that makes normal connections very difficult. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then smiled. You know, I've been struggling with figuring out what to do with my life after the Marines. Last night reminded me that there are still ways to serve and protect people, even outside the military. Sarah felt a spark of curiosity. What are you thinking? Agent Williams mentioned that the federal law enforcement agencies are always looking for people with military experience and specialized training. Maybe it's time for me to consider a career change. The implications of his suggestion weren't lost on Sarah. Federal agents often work together on multiple assignments, and partnerships between experienced operatives could last for years. It's a difficult life, she warned him. Dangerous, demanding, and it requires sacrificing a lot of normal personal relationships. Maybe, Marcus replied. But it also means working with people who understand the risks and share the commitment to protecting others. Agent Williams approached their position, carrying a folder thick with documentation from the night's investigation. "Agent Chen, excellent work as always," he said. "Your undercover operation provided the intelligence we needed to break up a major criminal conspiracy." "Thank you, sir." "What's the extent of the network we've uncovered?" "Based on the evidence we've recovered, we're looking at a trafficking operation that spans at least 12 states and involves connections to organized crime, domestic terrorist groups, and potentially foreign intelligence services. This is going to require a multi-year investigation with significant resources." Williams turned to Marcus. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I want to thank you for your assistance last night. Your tactical expertise and willingness to volunteer under dangerous circumstances directly contributed to the success of this operation." "Just doing what needed to be done, sir." Williams studied Marcus carefully. "If you're ever interested in discussing career opportunities with federal law enforcement, I'd be happy to provide references and guidance. We can always use people with your background and capabilities." After Williams left to continue coordinating the investigation, Sarah and Marcus returned to their quiet conversation. "It seems like the universe is presenting you with some interesting options," Sarah observed. "Maybe the universe is presenting both of us with some interesting options," Marcus replied. Sarah felt herself smile for the first time since the previous evening's events began. "You know, I've spent so many years maintaining cover identities and keeping people at a distance that I almost forgot what it feels like to work with someone who genuinely has your back. Trust is kind of essential in both military operations and law enforcement work," Marcus said. "And last night proved that we work well together under pressure." The sound of vehicles arriving interrupted their conversation. Additional federal agents and crime scene specialists were arriving to continue processing the evidence and expanding the investigation. Sarah stood up and brushed dust off her clothes. "I need to file my reports and debrief with Agent Williams about the next phase of this investigation." Marcus stood as well. "And I should probably check in with my unit and explain why I was involved in a federal law enforcement operation." They faced each other, both aware that this moment represented a turning point in both their lives. "Sarah, whatever happens with your next assignment or my potential career change, I want you to know that meeting you has been the most positive thing that's happened to me since I got back from Afghanistan." Sarah felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. "Marcus, you remind me of why I chose this type of work in the first place. Sometimes it takes meeting someone else who's willing to put themselves at risk for others to remember what we're really fighting for." They shook hands formally, but the gesture carried weight beyond professional courtesy. "If Agent Williams offers you a position with federal law enforcement, and if our paths cross again in a professional capacity, I hope we'll have the opportunity to work together," Sarah said. "I'm counting on it," Marcus replied. 6 months later, Sarah was conducting surveillance in a different small town in a different state, investigating a different criminal conspiracy. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Williams. "New partner assignment effective immediately. Report to Denver field office for briefing on multi-state organized crime investigation. Your partner has previous experience working with you and comes highly recommended." Sarah smiled as she read the message. Some things were worth waiting for, and some partnerships were worth the risks that came with them. When she walked into the Denver field office conference room the following week, Marcus Rodriguez was already there, reviewing case files and wearing the suit and badge of a federal law enforcement officer. "Agent Chen," he said formally, standing as she entered the room. "Agent Rodriguez," she replied, noting that he looked completely natural in his new role. "Ready for another undercover assignment?" he asked. Sarah looked at the case files, then at her new partner, and felt the familiar excitement that accompanied the beginning of a new mission. "Let's go catch some bad guys," she said. Outside the conference room windows, the city of Denver bustled with activity, unaware that 2 federal agents were beginning a partnership that would span years and multiple investigations, built on a foundation of trust, established during one violent night, in a small town where a Marine had tried to defend the honor of a woman he didn't know was perfectly capable of defending herself.